Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremando for YogaUOnline, and I'm here with Yasmin Lambat. Yasmin is a fascia-informed somatic movement therapist and educator, and the founder of a process called SomaSensing, which is a fascia tuning therapy that taps into fascia as the sixth sense organ, or much more simply put, as Yasmin describes it, the practice of learning how to tune into your body to bring you into a state of rest. Originally a fitness professional, Yasmin was introduced to fascial anatomy via the work of the practice of pole star Pilates, which brought her to the work of Thomas Myers, which we all know from Anatomy Trains, and all of his work in the field of fascia research and work. This inspired Yasmin to stop Pilates and undertake a study of Hatha yoga so that she could figure out a way to kind of weave that into the new discipline that she was picking up from the things she learned from Thomas Myers, which I think is a really kind of really an interesting exploration. And that eventually led her to somatic movement practices and the development of SomaSensing. So Yasmin, did I get that right?
Yes.
So welcome. I think that your story is really fascinating because it's the fascia that brought you into the body.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's the fascia. And the fascia combined with the sensory experience, so the somatic way in.
Less about
embodied experience
and specific technique and more about soma, of course, means body. So coming in to just really trying to understand your body.
Yeah, through body, because we're so used to body positioning and learning anatomy that way. And working with Thomas Myers, he introduced us actually to Feldenkrais, a little bit of Feldenkrais. And I was not aware of this interoceptive, this sensation of the body. So this embodied experience of anatomy began. This body sensation through somatic practice. And also Tom talking about not having the separation of the core that we had learned previously. So this started to intrigue me, together with having participants who were feeling stuck in their body, but it felt like it was on the inside.
Yeah.
So that kind of exploration began there. Yeah.
I feel like your work is really of the moment at this particular time in our collective psyche, in our collective lives, because we are a couple years post the worst of the pandemic, but I feel like the fallout from that emotionally, physically, people are kind of still waiting for the next shoe to drop in some ways. And the worldwide economy, I think it's a really turbulent time. And when we have turbulent times like that, I think we lose ourselves. And so finding your way back to yourself would be just a wonderful technique to encounter. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the ways that soma sensing, the important ways that it is bringing us back?
Sure. And, like you're saying, Lynn, the noise that we experience without realizing it, the noise of everything else outside of our control. And how do we come to quiet without the overwhelm of being in the body? Because the body can also send us overwhelming sensation. So learning how to tune into the body in a way that's gentle, that can quieten the noise of our body to quieten the mind, and exploring the pathways of this information, sending information through the body to calm stress, anxiety, and unlock this process of self-regulation. So really the first part of the practice is to simply learn how to pause, to tune in and bring the body to a resting state through fascial anatomy. That's the magic.
Well, one thing about the fascia, because I've been studying it, we are, of course, fascinated with fascia. We're fascinated, as Tom would say, at YogaU. So our audiences are very interested in fascia, but I think there's just so much this concept of it as the sixth sense, and that it is such a transmitter of so many things that perhaps we did not realize. Can you talk about the role of the fascia in things like nervous system regulation? And, we're also very into vagal tone and how the fascia really plays with all of these bits of disembodiment and how it can be a vehicle of embodiment.
Oh gosh, absolutely. So fascia is our fabric of embodiment. And because we've learned anatomy at the end of life through dissection, so a body of parts, if we go to the start of life at embryo stage, we begin to recognize that fascia, or what's known as mesenchyme, fascia's mesenchyme at the beginning of the embryonic stage of embodiment, shaped by sensation. So this fascia, which has a sensory part to it, unites every biological system in the body because it is our fabric of embodiment. And what has been emerging over the past, I would say, 15 years that I've kind of been looking at this through the work of Robert Schleip, James Oshman, and his approach to fascia as a sensory organ through the electromagnetic property of fascia, how fascia produces sound, emits light. So there's all this emerging research on this soft matter that becomes our fabric of embodiment of the whole. So it unites all our biological systems. And when we understand it as a sixth sense, we can influence the whole. And it takes a huge shift, a paradigm shift, especially in movement or manual therapy, where we were taught anatomy from through a biomechanical lens, where we were just looking at musculoskeletal system.
Yep.
This approach of anatomy, which includes tensegrity, by the way, or biotensegrity or fascia tegrity, which means fascia and the structure that it forms, allows us to access our whole biological system. Where fascial hydration lies at the heart of our well-being.
So for anyone not familiar, can you say a few more words about tensegrity and specifically fascial tensegrity, which is quite a big piece of Thomas Meyer's work, but also your work. So
yeah, well, I came across the word through Thomas Meyer's. Thomas Meyer's was the inroad for a lot of us movement and manual therapists, and then we've gone on to explore other experts in the fascial field. There's John Sharkey and Joanne Abramson and others. There's a few more, but Thomas Myers was the person who brought Stephen Levin to light. Stephen Levin is an orthopedic surgeon. He's coined the term biotensegrity. So tensegrity is a term that describes structures that are pre-tensioned. So before I get into kind of the technical part, let me just say that it means tensional integrity. So if we look at tensegrity as the form of our body, and rather than having a two-dimensional biomechanical system of a stacking structure, one block on top of the other, tensegrity structures are based on tension and compression, where there is a force pushing outward and a force pushing inward, which means that the structure is already held. It's pre-tensioned. So we're not having to work against gravity. It's independent of gravity. And Stephen Levin came to tensegrity through the architect Buckminster Fuller. So when we first heard about tensegrity through Thomas Myers, his books talked about Buckminster Fuller, the architect. And Buckminster Fuller looked to nature for his inspiration in design, designing buildings, designing the geodesic dome. He's responsible for the geodesic dome. And he allows us the representation of what's possible in living systems. So what is the structure that we are? So that's where it came from. And then Stephen Levin, inspired by the work of Buckminster Fuller and his student Kenneth Nelson, who built something called the Needle Tower, and you can see it to this day. It's a structure where it has cables and tension that's held in this kind of floating structure. And Stephen Levin saw this and realized that what he was looking for in anatomy was this type of model. He had already decided that when he was working with patients, that the body isn't designed in the way that he learned at medical school. So Thomas Myers introduced us to Stephen Levin. And if I were to really simplify it, it's to explore how fascia is the soft matter that shapes us into this tensegrity form, this three-dimensional structure. So you could either call it biotensegrity, Stephen Levin's word, or fascia-tegrity, which is the word that Joanne Avison and John Sharkey use, the way that fascia shapes our form into a three-dimensional structure, already tensioned. And I think that the thing about that, the penny that drops is we need to come to Sthira Sukham Asanam, Patanjali Sutra, about finding ease and comfort in the body for integrity to arise. So when we link it to our ancestry in yoga, we can understand how their felt sense was informing them of a structure that's pre-tensioned. I hope
It is, and it's making it really obvious, but I'm going to ask you to talk about it anyway, how it's an integrative concept. It's a completely integrative concept, all of it. And that dovetails so beautifully with yoga, which is a completely integrative concept if we practice it that way. So talk about how you have intersected those two concepts, because a lot of times, like right now, you know, I used to say that I went into kind of teaching therapeutically because I didn't want to work with people who were deciding between me and kickboxing that day. But yoga's gotten very physical, very athletic, if we let it. So talk about the integration that is possible in a yoga practice using these concepts.
So important, because yoga means integrity, means integration, absolutely. You know, we often hear that yoga is union or yoking, but actually it's integrity. It really fits in with the Stephen Levin's model, Thomas Myers' work. So how do we integrate this into yoga? We have to go back to the ancestry. We have to go back to the Upanishads. We have to go back to Samkhya Yoga, to Vedanta, and then to Patanjali, and look at the philosophy of yoga. What was the actual purpose? And the purpose was to come to quiet, for our inner knowing to arise. So the whole idea was we have an inner knowing. There is a wisdom within us, a consciousness, if you like. And when we want to reach samsara, all these philosophical terms, they might seem like they're out there, but there's a really simple way to get in and experience the ancestry of yoga that was mentioned in the sutras and the past. Look, I'm not an expert on all of it. I love to delve into it. And I love the parts that connect with somatic practice, because somatic practice is integrated. So this is what I want to say. And like you said, Lynn, yoga has become athletic, right? And I would go as far back as to say, even the original asana evolved from the need to have some kind of motion or movement in yoga, because yoga began with a sitting asana. And then, of course, with Krishnamurti's approach, which is not a bad thing of the way it evolved. It's just that we may need to bring it to a natural way that the body's designed. So we need to weave in biotensegrity and what's true, what's emerging to be true about the body, whether we agree or don't agree. But what we're looking at in the work of Thomas Myers and Stephen Levin is that the body moves in a spiral motion. Spiral motion is efficient, and asana emerge from that. You can find yourself in Gomukhasana, for example. And the way that I integrate it is to bring, for example, downward dog or Uttanasana, forward fold, and exploring the natural way the body responds. So if I were to fold forward to pick something up off the ground, does it happen on an in-breath or an out-breath? And if we're looking at tensegrity, without even knowing tensegrity, the spontaneous breath is in. The body self-stabilizes. So it's not an out-breath when we fold forward. So it's integrating those practices that can help us from overstretching the ligaments in our joints. So we can prevent overstretching through that expansive sensation or pandiculation. Pandiculation is a natural motion in the body. So when you're reaching up to reach for a mug on the top shelf of your kitchen, the body will naturally take a breath in and a spiral motion emerges. So when we're in yoga practice, you can be in seated like I am now and, send the floor away and a spiral emerges and there's a spontaneous in-breath. So it's bringing these simple initiation of movement that can weave into our current yoga, because movement is essential. I would kind of compare it to the principles of vinyasa. So the core principle of vinyasa yoga is flow.
Mm-hmm.
And vinyasa talks about continuity. So we want fascial continuity, awareness, integrating breath with motion. So what happens is the urge to move arises, and then the breath is accompanying that movement. So we can integrate this into yoga, into the asana in a way that is therapeutic, that is effortless, that allows freedom of movement. Even in cat-cow pose, in 4-point kneeling, starting at a place of rest and allowing the intuitive movements to unwind and explore, and those weaving in of those unwinding movements can happen in those postures.
So you're not talking about learning a whole new language or vocabulary. You're really talking about a strategy for approaching movement. And via that strategy, your practice becomes more self-embodying and more kind of tuning in and less top-down and more, as we say, bottom-up, more coming from the body itself. Would that be an accurate?
Well, if it comes from the body itself, yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to this. One, you're absolutely right. It's not a new movement practice at all. And in fact, somatic practices are very, very similar. They work with the natural body patterns. So it's not, you don't learn how to move. You allow the movement blueprints from your body to emerge. The body already knows how to move. It has a blueprint at embryo stage, and when we're born as infants, we begin to allow these movement blueprints to emerge if we're nurtured. If we're not nurtured and we are in a trauma state or a stressful environment, or babies are not nurtured or left on the ground, our movement patterns don't emerge. And so we embody that lived experience in our fascia from the time we're born. We can lose that. We can lose the will to want to move, or even feel like it's effortful, or move in prescribed ways. So yes, there's prescribed movement, and of course Pilates, even yoga is a prescribed way of moving. But at least with yoga, you've got the breath integration, you've got the body-mind integration. And what I'm offering, and so are some other yoga practitioners learning about fascia. There's another teacher on YogaU, Christine Wushke has been on YogaU, and we have a very similar approach. So there's teachers like ourselves that are saying, look, yoga has an incredible philosophy. What might be missing is the movements are still prescribed. How can we integrate the flow? And how can we bring these natural movement patterns into yoga that are interoceptive, so that we don't need to use props? Not that there's anything wrong with using props. So for example, if someone's tight in their hips or their hamstrings, there's a much easier way of getting there than trying to pull it into some kind of stretch, right? So I can give myself as an example. When I first started Hatha yoga, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to get there? And I'd use blocks and straps. And then I found somatic movement and these coaxing, pulsing movements. You know, you would not believe, had you seen me before, that I could sit so easily like this. And it's not through stretching, it's through coaxing and pulsing, working with the fascial fabric, letting those movements emerge. So if I'm sitting here in a yoga practice, I can coax or pulse, or I can, you know, roll. There's somatic yoga. Somatic yoga is amazing for that. And bringing in natural movement patterns. So allowing the hand to land where it lands without cueing, spreading the fingers, for example. Because in tensegrity structures, we have domes, arches in our hands and our feet. Being able to adjust the integrity of the foot from the inside without having to cue spreading the toes, for example, which will add strain. So in Vrukshasana, you could be standing with ease in your inner body, and the sensation will continue throughout your body. The force is distributed throughout. So you can find inner balance in yoga without having to prescribe how to stand, cueing alignment, what I call proprioceptive sensations that work with the outer sensation of the body. Interoceptive allows the body to self-organize. So that's where the natural part comes in, is, hey, you can sit and self-organize. You don't have to place everything in position.
Specific, put this
There's
here.
nothing.
There, no.
All it requires is stiram, sukham, asanam. Tune into your body. You are already sensing. Your body is self-sensing all the time. We tap into that body wisdom. It doesn't matter where you are. If you feel like your hands want to go back here, hang out. It's okay, and your body will start to do that. If you're in seated, instead of doing Ardha Matsyendrasana here, you could be here. You could be here and just hang out. You know, you're just hanging out, shoulder shrug releases the fascia here. So it's fascial anatomy linked with movement, and you could find a spiral here. So rather than a twist, we'll go to a natural spiral. So it's changing the positioning of your body to be at ease at all times.
That really changes the practice from the acquisition of poses to the acquisition of stillness, of, dare I say it, equanimity, right? The acquisition of an inner kind of peace or integrity or wholeness, you could say. Well, lucky for us, because it sounds really fascinating, you're going to teach a course on this, and you'll be sharing some of those techniques or the strategy, and helping us to figure out how to acquire that sensation. So it's called Yoga and Fascia Sensing, Cultivating Interoception and Enhanced Well-Being and Embodiment. It's a big name, but it means learning to tune in, correct?
Really, all it means, let me tell you, Lynn, all it means is learning to tune in and bring your body to rest. It's really, really simple. It's, you know, people who come to me with this practice, they just, the one thing everyone says is, this is ridiculously simple. all of them say that. I'm running a certification at the moment. Every time we meet, they're going, gosh, this is simple.
Yeah.
That's what it is. SomaSensing is take a moment to pause, tune in, and come to rest. We come back to Sthiram Sukham Asanam, the heart of yoga.
You are reminding me of a phrase that I learned from Gary Kraftsau, one of my teachers, who came down through Krishnamacharya tradition. And this is a phrase from that tradition, and it is simply deep, deeply simple. And I have written that handwriting, not even neatly, and put it in a little frame and just have it up where I teach so that I can always remember that exactly what you just said, simply deep, deeply simple, going to get you there every time. So what kinds of things? I know you're going to have 3 sessions and one of them is a full practice.
Yeah, so in the practice, I try and integrate some yoga asana, like vrikshasana, teaching vrikshasana 2 different ways, proprioception and interoception, because, you know, balanced postures can be really difficult for people. And how do we guide them to their sensory awareness and allow them to self-organize? So a lot of the practice is about self-organization. It's also guiding the difference in pandiculation. So introducing pandiculation, that the sensation, and pandiculation is really great for enhancing our body's shock absorbing capacity. So there'll be movements based on how to experience that sense of expansion. And then a kind of flow, the way that the body can flow from one to the next. So giving people the flavor of what's possible and an experience of how to be in a body that can self-organize.
Awesome. And just so people don't know, Vrikshasana is tree pose.
Oh, yes.
So we always have
I always try to,
not everyone
knows tree pose would be
Sanskrit.
And I love teaching that tree pose because it's the one practice where if there is strain in the body, so guiding the session through the lens of fascia and biotensegrity or tensegrity, the structure, taking the principles of Stephen Levin's work, and he's just absolutely amazing in the way he describes it. It just really lands for me. And I love teaching tree pose because anyone can experience whether their body's under strain. And I never get them to hold something when they're not, if their body's not ready. The whole purpose of the practice is, if the information is not ready, don't force it. You know, you could just shift your body weight over to one side and pause. You want to keep changing the information that the fascia holds by paying attention, mindful awareness, cultivating sensory wisdom is the purpose of the practice.
Excellent. Well, thank you for spending time with me. I'm excited for your course. I think people are going to get a lot out of it. And as I like to say, we'll see you in class.
Thank you. And thank you for your
so
curiosity and your lovely questions, Lynn.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.